Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today with Christian Johansen from Denmark, from the BRUUN&JEJLE firm, who has just taken his lesson inside our specializing master contract claim and delay management in construction works. For him to sum up briefly the contents of his presentation.
Yeah, well, thank you, Giovanni, and thanks a lot for having me giving this lecture on the management of claim and delay in construction works in Denmark and Scandinavia. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much.
What I've specifically giving input on during the lecture this morning was I focused firstly on describing the special features of Scandinavian law and Danish law in relation to the fundamentals of what I understand has been the primary focus of your students, namely the common law and the civil law approach, and describing a bit in detail that the Scandinavian approach is actually neither civil law nor common law, but is a quite and that especially applies in construction law, a unique way of handling construction contracts.
So a third way of
it's a third way of neither having a very formalistic approach as a civil law approach, but and likewise not a common law approach primarily based on case law, but it's an approach based on very much on agreed documents and standard form contracts, and legal precedents are developed over many years, with a specific focus on a duty to take care and a duty on loyalty in contracts. After that, I've then given a brief description on the Danish and Scandinavian standard form contracts for construction works and turnkey contracts and consultancy works, and giving an overview of where we are in the legal system, and giving a bit of comparison to the rules that the students have knowledge on from the F.lli contracts and from the other international contracts that they're familiar with. And then I've given specific input on how we in our systems manage claims and delay discussions, and giving a bit of input on the fundamentals on how to approach and how to handle discussions from a contractual approach, and how we see that discussion usually. And then ultimately I have then given them a presentation on the project that I have worked on over the last years, the City Ringen project in Copenhagen,
of course,
which was performed by a joint venture led by F.lli from Italy, and they have handed over to the Danish employer earlier this month. It's a very beautiful, very large, very impressive project that I've handed over.
I've heard it's fully automated.
It's fully automated, yes. So the trains they're driverless.
No driver.
No drivers, and they have and the stations are very beautiful, very unique, and the system is very well working. 17 new stations on the ground in central Copenhagen, and gives a quite unique facility for transportation of the inhabitants and the tourists in Copenhagen. So that was the final part of my presentation, and it gives
quite interesting.
Yeah, but also very interesting from the engineering perspective, but also from the legal perspective, because it illustrates a quite unique way of handling claims and delay management in projects, because there has been a quite productive relation between the employer and the contractors to manage discussions on claims and on delays throughout the project, which has shown to be both quite productive but also quite effective in order to handle disputes and delay issues, but also to reach commercially solid agreements between the parties.
And in your view, why engineers and architects should be interested in delving deeper into this kind of topics that maybe most people think are for lawyers, for people who are from a different background, not a technical one.
Well, I think it's fundamental for any person being skilled and educated as an architect or engineer working in international construction projects that you have a knowledge of how should you manage and how should you handle your discussions. One of the first things that you should do when you get into a project like these large-scale international projects is to learn the fundamentals of the contract and try to understand that you should not do as you did on your last project, which perhaps was in another country, but you should actually try to manage the project in the region or in the nation or in the land where you've actually in the country as it is where you actually are under the regime that this is actually dealt with, and therefore I think it's quite fundamental for also engineers and architects who must have the direct commercial technical discussion with their employer or with their subcontractor to handle it under the impression of the regime that they're in. Because I think all of us have seen projects being performed without sufficient in-depth knowledge of the traditions where you are, but actually by the use of old traditions, and that very often gives it doesn't give the result that you hope for.
Of course. So thank you very much, very helpful, and I really hope to have you again next for the next edition of the Specialized Master.
I hope so too. Thank you
very much.